Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. This week we have Elon Musk getting sued by a shareholder saying that he was insider trading. We also have companies having a record amount of buybacks and some news about the pandemic, how most of that stuff was all made up. There was no science behind it. You remember fixing the mic here. You remember what they were saying, right? Trust the science. Trust the science. In May, all-time high in corporate buybacks. 154 companies announced $201 billion in buybacks. That indicates that I have a lot of confidence in their future earnings. Apple was the biggest one of all at $110 billion. And obviously that helps the stocks go up. And I'm sure that doesn't affect the bonuses of all the executives because they get paid in those stocks, remember. The Fed President Neil Kashkari also said that the Fed on Tuesday is most likely going to hold rates higher for longer. Remember that number, that the rate, the percentage that they have the interest rate at is a significant amount of impact on the economy. And the reason why is because we live in a over-financialized economy where everybody borrows money to buy stuff. Buy a house, buy a car, your credit cards, everything is based on these interest rates. And so with almost 70% of the economy in the United States being consumer spending, meaning that people need to borrow money to go out and spend money, right? Need to take out loans to buy cars and houses. That slows the economy down quite a bit because people don't have access, money isn't moving, put it that way. In most developed nations, I don't know how you want to phrase it, industrialized nations, the US, Canada, most of Europe, Japan, Germany, Australia, most companies that are already industrialized, the biggest portion of their economy is consumer spending. So we have a situation where Germany, for example, is about 50% consumer spending. So in the US, for example, we have about almost 70% of the economy being the consumer spending, which is obviously based significantly on these interest rates. And then we have about 17% or so being the housing market, construction, sales, things like that, which is also based on these interest rates. So the higher they are for longer, the more likely we're going to be heading into a recession. And obviously that doesn't necessarily bode well for Biden's chances if there's a lot of bad economic data and bad news circling in the news about the economy. The stocks this week were all negative in the United States. In the Communist Republic of Canada, it went down 0.16%. In some of the conspiracy theory news, they found a skull in Greece that completely shatters the out of Africa ideal. 700,000 years old. Pretty interesting. The Dr. Fauci confesses that he, quote unquote, made up the COVID rules, including the 6 feet social distancing and masking kids. But remember, trust the science. Like, you guys remember when you walked into a restaurant in the US and they're like, well, you got to walk in with your mask. But when you sit down, you can take the mask off because obviously the virus doesn't attack you when you're sitting down. And then if you want to go to the bathroom, oh, no. You got to put it back on because, the virus and the higher altitudes, these people, just remember what they did because this is going to continue happening, in my opinion, one way or another. So just remember to not trust absolutely anybody that says anything from the government at all. Millions of chickens killed in a fire in Farina Farms in Illinois, one of the nation's largest free-range egg facilities. Go back a little bit. Story time, conspiracy theories. Story time. I don't know if you remember during the pandemic that all of a sudden people were reporting that lived on farms and homesteads that their chickens stopped laying eggs. If you remember, in the US, we mostly buy feed for the eggs, right? It's kind of like, think of it like dog food, little pellets and things and corn and all this kind of stuff. And as soon as the people changed the feed, they stopped going to the store and buying the feed and they bought local feed or they gave their chickens something else, they immediately started laying eggs again. So this, to me, is not a accident. I really do think, for example, Bill Gates is now the biggest owner of farmland in the United States. There's a reason for that, guys. Don't think it's for your health. Reserve Bank of India silently moving over 100 tons of gold reserves from the UK to India. It's the first time that they're going to hold their gold since 1991. Remember what I always tell you guys, don't pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do. And countries like China, Russia, and India are reportedly stockpiling a ton of gold, right? A ton of gold. You can see the move that we've had in gold and silver, for example, to be able to control more of their assets. The question I have is, are they preparing for a crisis? Like the new BRICS currency, for example, that could be backed by gold and silver or commodities? One of the things that you may not know either, because it isn't, you got to read the conspiracy channels. The German government was holding their gold in New York. I believe it was Fort Knox. And when they requested their gold back, the U.S. didn't give it back to them right away. And when they eventually did give it back, it was recast. Meaning, when they have the gold, they stamp it with the name. Well, they did another stamp on it. So that means that the Germany's gold wasn't really there. So the real question is, conspiracy there, Marcello, does the U.S. even have any other gold anymore? Do we even have it? Was it all just sold? European markets are mostly lower. Istanbul and Russia were the biggest losers there. Latin America, mostly lower as well. The Bovespa, which is the biggest market in Latin America, went down 1.80%. The New Libertarian Republic of Argentina went up almost 9%. They had a great movement. Africa and the Middle East was mixed. Saudi Arabia, the biggest loser. And in the far, far east, Australia, Asia, that whole area, Asia, Indonesia was the biggest loser there, although most of the markets were mostly lower. Bitcoin and crypto news, not a whole lot of news in the crypto space other than the fact that it's continued to go up, it seems, every week. This week, however, went down 2.14%. As of Saturday morning, it's at 67,650. And in commodities, oil had a negative week as investors are awaiting the oil mafia, OPEC, to see what they're going to actually determine in terms of output cuts. And so with the expectation of the situation with the interest rates, if, for example, the interest rates in the United States do stay higher for longer, that's going to impact the movement of the economy, meaning the economy isn't going to do well, meaning that there's going to be a lot less demand for oil. So U.S. crude went down 0.94% to $76.99. The international Brent went down 1.24% to $81.11. And cacao, which is used to make chocolate, the output is seen near 40% below the level that it was at before, for example, last year, because of weather, disease, and cacao smuggling. And one of these countries, Three countries in Western Africa control about 70% of the entire cacao industry. One of these countries, I forgot the name, I forgot to write it down here, basically relies on loans to be able to get seeds and help the farmers to be able to develop the crop. Well, now since the crop is 40% lower than what it should be, they're not able to get the loan. And since they're not able to get the loan, that could affect the production even more. So plant some cacao fruits in your backyard. Gold is down 0.28% to $2,327.70. Silver is up 0.26% to $30.49. Financial and banking news, the Eurozone inflation is at 2.6%, which is about 0.1 higher than expected. The uptick is seen widely due to the fact that the European Union is expected to actually decrease the interest rates. First reduction since 2019. And in political news, Trump was what became, I should say, the first president convicted of a crime on Thursday. The New York jury found him guilty of falsifying docs to cover up the payment to silence of the porn star ahead of the 2016 election. Supposedly they're going to appeal, but now technically he's a convicted felon, as the whole media wants you to hear, because of the upcoming election. Economic news, the unemployment rate in the European Union is at 6.4%, a new record low. Record lows don't really matter because the European Union has only existed for maybe 10, 20, 30 years. German retail sales fell more than expected in April, decreasing by 1.2% compared to the previous month. Remember that in most of the industrialized economies, we're talking, Europe, most of Europe, Canada, the U.S., Japan, Australia, New Zealand, for example, the majority of the economies, or a big chunk at least, is consumer spending. I don't know other countries' numbers, but I looked up Germany and they're about 50%. So if the consumer spending goes down, remember Germany is the third largest economy in the world after United States and China. So if they start getting affected quite a bit, then that could affect the whole worldwide economy as well. U.S. GDP data for quarter one had economic growth at 1.3%, the slowest growth rate in almost 2 years. And German business sentiment is stagnant in the month of May after 3 consecutive months of improvements. So looks like things aren't doing well. You can see some red flags in terms of the global economy. And in corporate news, these are a lot of red flags. American Airlines, their stock is down over 13% after they cut their guidance. They're seeing their revenue, expected to see their revenue fall by 6% during the same period compared to a year ago. And the prior guidance not to be greater than 3%. So they're starting to lower their numbers. Salesforce went down by 20%, their worst day in 20 years after their earnings tumble over 19%. They missed their revenue numbers the first time since 2006. Salesforce is a huge technological conglomerate. And basically what's happening is now with artificial intelligence, a lot of these companies can go out and just make their own software instead of use Salesforce. And obviously, we have the whole situation with the economy as well. A lot of companies looking to cut back. Dell went down over 17% after their gross margins could face more pressure in 2025. Dell is starting to face a lot of problems with their expenses in regards to expanding for artificial intelligence. And NVIDIA, the AI queen, I should say king, they might surpass Apple as the world's most valuable company. Right now, Apple's number 1, NVIDIA's number 2, and they've been mostly benefiting over this huge new AI market. Their market value has tripled in value, their market cap to $2.68 trillion. Shareholder of Tesla filed a lawsuit against Elon Musk, saying that he was insider trading after he sold over $7.5 billion in the stock in late 2022, saying that he sold the shares before the bad information was going to come out in the earnings. It netted up about $3 billion in profits. And in technology, the AI boom is fueling a demand for power as many companies start to invest quite a bit in infrastructure to be able to try to compete in the new market. And in trade news, Russia is stepping up its bid to control even more of the grain industry. Remember that when the war broke out in Ukraine, Ukraine was known as the breadbasket of Europe. And Russia is quite a breadbasket as well. They grow a ton of food that they export all over the world, and they want to be able to have a lot of power over that, I imagine, because it's obviously geopolitical as well. International events, temperatures rose 52 degrees Celsius, or about 125.6 Fahrenheit in Pakistan, in the capital of, not a record, but close to the record. And in India, the capital of India, New Delhi, they had their highest temperature ever at 52.9 degrees Celsius, or just over 127 degrees Fahrenheit. And because of all the global warming you see in the news, what they aren't going to report is that the Arctic has the highest level of ice in 21 years. Google it. And South Korean defense minister said that there's more evidence suggesting that weapons that were used in Ukraine by Russia came from North Korea, that were quote unquote illegally imported by Russia from North Korea. And now they're starting to sound the alarm, because maybe now North Korea can use some of the more sophisticated and advanced weapons from Russia, and that may be used against South Korea, which isn't bueno. And at least 33 people, including election officials, died on duty during that heat wave in New Delhi, which is actually something really, really sad. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, the preppers were right.